Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group Roundtable. We are globally connected with Kaiser Health News. Today is Saturday, December 4th, 2021. December is AIDS Awareness and National Human Rights Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And our panelist today is Cara Anthony of Kaiser Health News, she's a Midwest correspondent. We're going to talk about Black tech and founders who want to change the culture of healthcare one click at a time. So, Cara, how you doing?
Good. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good for you to be here. So tell us a little bit about, first off, what culturally competent care is and how that led you to your, I guess you're going to call yourself a pioneer in a lot of ways, to trying to be a disruptor using technology in healthcare.
Yeah, I had the great opportunity to interview 4 Black tech founders. And so as a correspondent for Kaiser Health News, I've been really looking into culturally competent care for several years now. And I like to give a couple of simple definitions that help people really understand what that is. And the first is, we want culturally competent, for example, a hairstylist. You want someone who understands the texture of your hair. During holiday time, we want culturally competent cooks, people who understand the traditions of wonderful dishes that we love to enjoy this time of year. And it's really the same thing for our health care. We want doctors who understand what we go through, especially as Black Americans. A doctor, for example, who understands that racism in America can make you sick. You can break out into hives. You can become suicidal. You can go into mental distress. And so culturally competent care is really all about finding a doctor who sees you as a whole person. And if your doctor isn't culturally competent, then at least finding someone who practices a bit of cultural humility, who says, you know what? I don't understand everything, but I'm listening to you. I'm here for you, and let's create a plan to make you feel better.
And how does the technology part of it work into play? So how does technology help people or help doctors and physicians and nurses do a better job of connecting with people?
Yeah, so for my latest article, I interviewed 4 Black tech founders, one of which is in Chicago. And I'll just kind of run down the list on how they're using technology. They're creating apps and platforms that people can use from the comfort of their own home to connect with culturally sensitive doctors. And so one of those apps is called Health in Her Hue. This app helps Black women and women of color connect with culturally sensitive doctors around the country. So let's say, for instance, you are a Black woman who's living in the Chicago area, but you are not feeling as heard by your doctor as you would like to. Well, you can go into Health in Her Hue and type in your zip code and let them know what kind of doctor you're looking for. And it's not just a regular doctor that you would go to see for primary care visits, but there are dualists in there, there are therapists in there, and so even surgeons are listed in Health in Her Hue. And so then that app gives you a list of doctors who understand cultural sensitivity and why it's so important. There's another app that's based in the South called MedHall, and this is one that I think is particularly important for veterans in the South, is that for people who have a hard time getting to the doctor, that's their goal and mission. They use technology to connect people and help them get the rides that they need, and kind of reminds you of Uber, or in a sense of like a taxi. Instead, they work with your provider directly. They have the people who have the transportation, and they are the go-between in the middle, so that people can just simply, get to where they're going to, and so they can get the health care that is so important. Another app that is based out of Chicago is it's a platform rather, called Clinify Health. Clinify Health make sure that people don't fall through the gap, that if you're an at-risk patient or in an underserved area, your doctor will get an alert to say, hey, you know what, I haven't seen that person in a while. And instead of using an emergency room as your first line of defense, Clinify Health basically helps alert your doctor to say, you know what, I need to contact them to get them in here. And last but not least, I interviewed the Black founder of Hurdle. This is another wonderful app that's really focused on culturally competent care, and they focus on therapy, which is so big. So they help people find therapists who will not ignore their culture, but rather honor it. So yeah, that's rundown of the apps and platforms that I've been looking into.
And then what was it like, so sitting down with people that are really trying to be game changers, did anything strike you personally? Or were you like blown away by anything you saw in particular?
Well, one thing that was really interesting was the way they all supported each other. As you would imagine, this is a really the tech world is a large space. It's a huge industry, but they are, instead of being maybe competitive and not talking to one another or trying to beat out the other person, these four founders have really found friendship and kinship and trying to figure this out. They all have their areas of expertise, and I particularly found it refreshing that they have conversations together about funding. They have conversations about how difficult sometimes that it's not always, even though you have a seat at the table, that it's not always an easy seat to sit in. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a really interesting element that was kind of unexpected during this reporting process.
So I think cooperation brings more results than competition a lot of times.
Yes, definitely in this case.
So then when you were talking to these groups and then you were seeing like their progress, how did they start from point A to point B? Did they give you an insight as to how they got off the ground? What gave them the courage to become entrepreneurs and start something? Because the tech field is very, it's very competitive. It's not easy to become, the next Mark Zuckerberg or the next, Bill Gates. So what's their motivation and drive to take that kind of risk?
Yeah, there's a line in this article that people will be able to read more about. I hope they go online and read the full article. But a line in the story explains just that many of these tech founders were inspired by their parents and their grandparents. Wow. And I thought that was just so endearing when I started to listen to their stories. I'll give one example. I'll give a few. I feel like we have some time here. The grandmother of the founder of MedHall, the one that is so focused on transportation in the South and helping people get to the doctor, her grandmother was a double amputee who lost both of her legs due to diabetes. And in watching her mother do the caregiving for her mother, the founder's grandmother, she felt so inspired. She watched her mom struggle. Her mom is a working teacher still to this day. Watched her grandmother has since passed, but she watched her mom go, through this struggle of really trying to get her grandmother to the doctor. And then now all of these years later, she's become a successful entrepreneur who has a whole business and a company and a mission to help other people not go through the same thing. The founder of Health in Her Hue, the woman who created the app for other women who are looking for culturally sensitive care, she had a tough situation when she was in grad school. She was working on a job and she was not being treated fairly. It made her very sick. As I mentioned early in this interview, racism in this country can have not only mental effects, but physical effects. You can literally break out into hives. She had a rash, and a white doctor just suggested, you take 2 Allegra and, maybe that'll make you feel better. I'm not sure what this is. And in the end, once she was relieved from that job, she started to feel better. She wasn't under that strain of the stress and not being treated fairly and with respect. But she was so frustrated. She said, well, maybe if I was comfortable enough to talk to my doctor about this, she wouldn't have just prescribed allergy medicine and said, best wishes. And so those heartfelt stories have really drive those entrepreneurs to keep going, because while this is their professional work, it's also very personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So personally, as a woman, as a Black woman, do you feel like you can relate to your doctor pretty well? Reading the article, I kind of got the sense that for women sometimes that is a wall, where sometimes you don't feel comfortable always expressing the things that really really bothering, because you maybe are like you have maybe some kind of like a judgment or maybe like a fear factor where they may not understand or they might see you a different way.
Totally. I started reporting at Kaiser Health News about 2.5 years ago now. And one of the first articles that I actually had the opportunity to come on this show and talk about it was about Black pharmacists who were filling the culture gaps in healthcare because people could not find Black doctors. And that was my first really look into culturally competent care, when I just interviewed a a Black pharmacist couple from East St. Louis, Illinois, downstate, and they really just became this go-to, and still are to this day, a go-to for so many members of the community who don't feel heard by their doctors. And so from that and that reporting and that learning, I really changed everything. I ended up deciding to really pursue someone who would understand me. And even if that person wasn't Black, I really was focused on them being culturally competent or culturally humble. And so that in that journey, I've changed everything, and I've really seen a difference. I wasn't able to find a doctor, but I was able to find a nurse practitioner who was well qualified to help me through, just daily, everyday things that I deal with. And so it's made all the difference because I totally have different conversations with her than I did with previous primary care doctors. Sometimes she just is like, okay, Cara, like, what's going on today? We just talk to each other, and it feels like more like a conversation than maybe an interview with someone that I'm not as familiar with. So I'm really grateful for her, and I'm grateful to learn more about this through my reporting because I've totally applied it to my personal life. Even my daughter has a Black pediatrician who I now will, hopefully will build a relationship with and learn to trust. So I think that it's a good thing all around if you can find it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about having a cultural connection with the person that you're with. So that cultural connection is such much of a part of your identity. And then if someone doesn't quite understand or is seeing things through one lens, one prism, you don't really get that connection, and it often leads you don't really get the chance to communicate and connect on that level. To really, especially we talk about something so sensitive, which is your health and also your lifestyle, because your health is basically an open book to your lifestyle, what you do. From your perspective, doing the work that you do, writing these articles and things like that, how have you changed your life as far as your behaviors and things in regards to your health?
Well, I think I'm in a multi-generational home, so I have the great opportunity to be in the home with my parents who are in their 70s, and then there's me, I'm in 30s, and my daughter, she's just 5 years old. And so really all of us, I think my daughter included, we're no longer in this space of, now that I've become a healthcare journalist, we're no longer in this space of, a take what you can get type of attitude when we go into the doctor. We really understand now, I believe, in the power of a second opinion. I'll say that. There are so many wonderful doctors who have really great hearts, and I feel like if you really try to pursue that and don't just take what you can get, if you aren't feeling heard by your doctor, then say that. It's okay to say, I don't think you're really listening to me, because oftentimes, and there's plenty of studies that have shown this, that Black people do not feel heard, or they're often written off, and sometimes unfortunately viewed to have higher pain thresholds and things of that nature. And that's really, devastating,
yeah.
Right? Especially if you are dealing with something, it's like, well, don't you hear what I'm saying? And so I think for us, on a very personal level, and from everyone from my parents in their 70s to my daughter who is just 5 years old, even encouraging her to tell the doctor, truly, how are you doing? How are you growing? How are you feeling today? And being transparent and open. So I think there's a lot of strength in that. And I hope that other people, especially the listeners here, feel like they can really talk to their doctors. And if they feel like they don't, that it is totally okay to get a second. And sometimes, a third opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, because it is your body, and you only get one you. Right. So you have to take care of yourself.
I think whether you're talking about finance, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about wealth, whatever it is, your attorney, you need to have someone that you can connect with. That's the most important thing. If you can't connect with that person, you're not going anywhere. That person's not giving you 100%, because even if they're trying to give you 100%, you can't receive it because you're not on the same page.
Exactly.
I think that's what you said was really remarkable about empowering yourself to speak up. And there used to be a PSA. Actually, there were two PSAs that came out. One was, I remember once, like when we were kids, basically growing up. There was one that said, "Get a second opinion." That was a big PSA that was out across everywhere, on television, on the radio. And then there was one recently that was talking about speaking up when you have something's not right, and the person's like, the person really feels like they're being drinking glass shards or whatever, but they're telling them that they feel fine. Or the guy's sitting with an arrow in his heart, and he's like, "Oh, I'm okay." So we got to speak up, especially when we're feeling pain, where we're not, or things just aren't right. So what do you think from your experience? What do you think keeps people from not just besides not connecting with their doctor, but there's something else psychologically that goes on with us, with people in general, with Americans, where we don't want to confess, something is wrong with us or something is to get the help that we need.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak from a personal perspective here. Again, just referencing my experience being in a multi-generational home, it's like sometimes pride just gets in the way. I have a wonderful mother who is a very strong woman, super resilient, and a lot of days she's dealing with a really tough arthritis. And I'm sure plenty of listeners can empathize and maybe even identify with that. And sometimes it's just like, that pride, you just don't want to say, I can't do it. And it can make you feel down in the dumps. But there is power in speaking up so that people can help you and so that you can get the, aid that you need. I think the other issue, and it's really deep, but in this country, just historically, what Black people, especially in this country, have gone through in terms of the healthcare divide and access to fair treatment and access to healthcare, period, that is quality and, really helpful. And so I do think that some of that plays a role still today. Well, we know that it does, that there are so many people that are on the front lines fighting for, people to have equal access to health care and quality health care. And so I think that all, plays a huge role in it. And so there are just so many different factors. Transportation can, still, again, referencing the app MedHall in the South, that's why that app exists. And so there are several reasons that probably contribute to that. But in the end, and hopefully today, some listeners will be encouraged to just make that call, because that could be the difference. It could make a huge difference, because a lot of times, too, I think in our communities, we are, again, referencing like Clinified Health is trying to help people not use the ER as the first line of defense. Okay. Sometimes you can catch something early if you just go ahead and make that call, even before you get sick. Just those regular check-ins make a huge difference, and plenty of studies have shown that.
Did you see these apps that were created by the entrepreneurs that you talked to? That you see people using these? Are they being successful at getting these apps out there?
The one that was first brought to my attention, and when I started doing a lot of research on this, was the app called Health in Her Hue. And there are several others I encourage people to really explore. If you put in culturally competent care near me, things like that, if you really try to look and search, you'll find other platforms as well. But I would say in terms of the numbers of and what these creators have experienced, they've experienced great success, because when Health in Her Hue launched, they had more than 34,000 users on that platform in the first 2 weeks. And most of those users were Black women. And so that tells me something, that if you can imagine getting 34,000 people into a room, in a matter of 2 weeks. I mean, that's like an arena. You packed full. So to me, that does represent success, and it also represents the appetite for this kind of connection and for this kind of product. And so they're definitely on to something here. And I think we'll see more platforms and websites and apps start to really pop up as more people get in tune with cultural humility as it relates to healthcare, and then cultural competency as it relates to healthcare.
Okay. And tell us where we can hear or read that article in the Kaiser Health. What's the website?
Yeah, so all of my writing is available at KHN.org. And so if you put that into your browser or in your phone, you should be able to find it there. And the headline for this particular article was Black Tech Founders Want to Change the Culture of Healthcare One Click at a Time. And so really interesting stuff to really dive in and kind of see the inside of their brains and how they work. And I learned a lot about the the tech world. I have a brother who's an engineer for Microsoft, and so I was calling him trying to, hey, Kay, am I getting it all right? And, really trying to make sure we hit the right mark with this. And we did, I believe. This article has been read widely across the country, and so I hope more people continue to dive in.
Yeah, this was a good article. I liked it a lot, learned a lot myself. And then also, like I said, listeners, you want to go and check out this article because it has all of those apps listed in there. So go check it out and digest and look at those apps and see if they can be useful to you. You personally, which one is your favorite? Was it the Hue app, or which one is the one that you think you might actually use?
Well, here's the thing. So some of them, now, while they all have a vision for being available nationwide, some of them are more geographically based right now. But I think all of them really are super, super interesting. And I had we haven't talked much about Hurdle, the one that was focused really a lot on therapy and mental health. But I think that is another area where we're going to see really explosive growth over the next few years, especially as talking about mental health becomes less taboo in the Black community. For so many years, we didn't talk about how we were feeling, mentally. And there was this old saying, which you're probably familiar with, was what goes on in this house stays in this house. Yeah. And less people feel that way, that if you are experiencing some kind of abuse in that house, if you're experiencing some kind of mental distress in that house, if you're not feeling healthy in your house or in your body, that you need to say that and say something. And so as more people feel empowered to kind of let go of that thinking, I think that there probably will be explosive growth in this area. But all of them are doing really important work. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. I probably will have a part 2 of this article that I'll have to write up.
You never know.
Make
$1 billion. Yeah. So one thing I noticed about veterans too, like we touched on this a little bit early, but veterans have a hard time of speaking up and talking to people and saying, hey, something's wrong. Because we're oftentimes taught to or trained to, swallow it up, to suck it up, to not be, weak or whatever, be strong, just go through it, just deal with it, type of thing. So once you transition back into the civilian world, sometimes it's hard to turn that switch off or to turn that training off a little bit. But it's necessary because that gets you the help that you need in order to live and survive and grow and be stronger. So in your perspective, do you see a lot of do you see a shift in the mindset of veterans returning home? Do you see a shift in the mindset of people being able to be more open about their problems and actually reach out and look at technology even for help?
Yeah, I think the world is really changing all around on that front, and I could definitely see that for veterans or anyone who has experienced. I've covered quite a few stories about mental health and particularly about trauma and everything from generational trauma to racial trauma. And so I would say that the trauma that veterans have experienced definitely falls right in there. And I think more doctors are realizing that even if they are not necessarily focused on the area of mental health, that they can direct people to get the help that they need. And there's an army of therapists around the country who are ready to do, just that, because people are realizing how important it is. Because again, you can go into mental distress, and we know, unfortunately, people become, suicidal, and it is okay to talk about that. I think there's also a new generation of folks who are both veterans and not, who are openly talking about how they feel and what is making them feel like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so I think the more we normalize conversations like that, the better off that will be. I think there's a lot of hope there. I'll just say that.
Mm-hmm. And how did you come across these guys? I mean, so you wrote this article. How did you get there? How did you get in touch with these 4 people that they're doing these apps and doing all this stuff in technology?
Yeah, well, really, I kind of, I'm always looking for story ideas. And so a couple of years ago when I wrote about Black pharmacists and was just really being introduced to this idea of culturally competent care, I first came across Health in Her Hue, and I thought, what's that? And I just kind of put it in my back pocket, and then things just kind of one thing went after the another, and I realized that particular founder was connected to 3 others who were doing just fabulous work and important work. And so it kind of just went from there. But that happens a lot in my reporting. One story just leads to the next.
Mm-hmm. What do you think your next project is going to be?
It's hard to say, but being from East St. Louis, I'm located just adjacent to East St. Louis, Illinois right now. And so, I'm always looking for ways to tell stories out of my communities. Stories that, shed light, and then stories that also shine a light. And so recently I wrote about kidney disease and kidney testing. Mm-hmm. So, more on that front, but always continuing to cover culturally competent care. So thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. And that was a great read. I liked it very much. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.